Two almost identical lenses. One for $300, the other one for $550. But which one is the better of the two? Let's find out. Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto. I'm a photographer, and today I have with me the Yongnuo 11mm f1.8 super wide angle for Sony APS-C cameras, like the a6700 that happens to be my Sony APS-C camera. But I also have the Sony 11mm f1.8, almost exactly the same lens, similar specifications. But is this Sony almost 2 times better a lens compared to the Yongnuo? In this video we're going to compare these two and find out if this Sony is worth the extra money. But before we go into that, let me show you a few pictures that I shot on this Yongnuo 11mm f1.8, because real life photography is not about comparing lenses or pixel peeping or anything like that. So let's first enjoy a few pictures and then we will compare these two lenses. One more thing I have to say before we can continue. Yongnuo very kindly sent this lens to me for a review. But as always, I reserved the right to say my honest opinion, what I really think about the product, and no money changed hands. This Sony lens is mine. I have bought this with my own money and paid the full price about a year ago. Now, without further ado, let's compare. First off, the build quality. The Yongnuo is all metal construction except the plastic hood, and it feels quite nicely put together. Everything feels nice and tight. The focus ring feels a little bit too loose to my taste, but then again, you're not likely to use the manual focus that often. Other than that, it feels like a premium product and does not feel like a budget lens, which it actually is. The Sony exterior is some sort of high quality feeling plastic. This also feels like a premium product, doesn't feel cheap even though it's plastic. At least the exterior is plastic and everything else feels nice and tight, and the manual focus ring has a little bit nicer resistance to it compared to the Yongnuo. And if I'd have to use manual focus, I would much rather manual focus the Sony lens than the Yongnuo. The button and the switch on the side of the Sony, they feel slightly more premium and precise compared to the button and the switch on the Yongnuo lens. This is just a personal observation, but that's how they feel to me. I'm gonna give both lenses 1 point for the build quality. They feel equally well put together, at least when I have them in my hands. Next up is the size and the weight. Neither lens can be called big, heavy or bulky. However, there is a difference. The Yongnuo weighs about 261 grams and the Sony weighs about 181 grams. So there is a distinctive difference, and if you have many lenses in your bag and each one is 80-100 grams lighter, then that adds up and your whole bag ends up being lighter in weight. And also the Sony is slightly more compact when it comes to the exterior dimensions. So I'm gonna give 1 point to the Sony on this one. The next one is the features. The Yongnuo has a very nice feature set for a budget lens. There is a very nice aperture ring that can be declicked if you prefer that. There is a button on the side of the lens, programmable button. There is a switch for autofocus, manual focus, but this switch can also be used with the wireless remote controller that you can purchase separately. I don't need such a controller, but it can be useful for some applications. Then there is the manual focus ring, of course, and a plastic lens hood, and also a weather sealed mount, but no mention of any other kind of weather sealing. The Sony feature set is also quite nice. There is no aperture ring, but there is a button, programmable button, autofocus, manual focus switch, and this lens is fully weather sealed according to Sony. There are several gaskets or seals inside the lens, so at least on paper this looks like it's more or better protected against hard conditions or rough weather and things like that compared to the Yongnuo. I'm gonna give both lenses 1 point for features. And the next up is the sharpness and chromatic aberrations. Let's first look at the mid part of the frame. This is my test scene, and here we can see a crop wide open from both lenses, and as we can see, the sharpness is excellent, already wide open on both lenses, no complaints there, and it doesn't really get that much better even by stopping down because it's so good already wide open. And then the corner sharpness. Here is my test scene, and we are looking at the top right corner of the picture, and that's also where my focus point was when I took the pictures. And here is a crop from both cameras, both lenses, wide open, and as we can see, the Sony is already very good wide open in the extreme corner. The Yongnuo instead is soft, and there's plenty of chromatic aberration visible too. By stopping down, the Sony doesn't seem to improve, it's already so good wide open. The Yongnuo instead continues to improve by stopping down, but it never really catches up with the Sony, which is so good even wide open. Also, the chromatic aberrations with the Yongnuo, they are a bit of a nuisance even when stopped down. You can of course correct chromatic aberrations in post, but the Sony will give you much cleaner pictures straight out of camera. So when it comes to the sharpness and chromatic aberrations, Sony gets the point because it's clearly so much better in this category. Now the distortions. Both of these lenses have quite a strong native barrel distortion. However, the Sony is very well corrected in camera, and at least the Adobe Lightroom and DxO Photolab 7 both have a really good lens profile for the Sony. So you'll get nice distortion-free pictures without any manual post-processing. The Yongnuo instead is not corrected in camera, and there's also no lens profile in Adobe Lightroom or DxO Photolab 7. Don't know about other post-processing apps. These are the two that I frequently use. So if you find the Yongnuo distortions distracting, you will have to manually correct them in post. And one more thing worth mentioning. The Sony angle of view seems to be slightly wider than the Yongnuo angle of view. Not a big deal. However, after you correct the distortions in post, in the Yongnuo pictures, the difference in the angle of view becomes greater, and that may or may not be a deal breaker for you, because one of the main reasons to buy a super wide angle lens is to get that super wide angle for interiors and other situations that require that super wide angle. So you don't necessarily want to sacrifice too much of that super wide angle by correcting distortions or other optical flaws. So I'm gonna have to give the distortion point to the Sony, even though both rely on software corrections, but the Sony is actually already corrected for you, so you don't have to do any manual work for that. Now filming on the Yongnuo wide open at f1.8, I'm not going to rate the bokeh because neither lens is a bokeh monster, and you're not likely to buy these lenses for beautiful, spectacular bokeh pictures. Now filming on the Sony wide open at f1.8. However, if you intend to use your lens or camera lens combo for vlogging or something like this, you can appreciate the slightly soft background that you can create at f1.8 aperture, possible on both lenses. So I'm gonna give 1 point to both lenses for that soft video background that you can create. The next one is the backlight performance, resistance to flare and reflections. Both lenses perform pretty well, I think, considering they are fast aperture super wide angles. However, at least to my eyes, it looks like the Sony is slightly better of the two. It holds up better, the contrast is higher, and also there's a little bit less flare and reflections. The difference is not big, and like I said, both lenses are quite good in this regard. But I'm gonna have to give the point to the Sony again, because at least to me it performs better here. Then the autofocus performance. The Yongnuo has one stepper motor, but the Sony lens, despite of its, let's say, affordable price for a first-party lens, it has two linear motors, and linear motors are far more advanced and better focus actuators compared to stepper motors. They are faster, more powerful, and stepless. However, in real life, I didn't notice that much difference between these two lenses, and I'd say both lenses give you fast, accurate, reliable autofocus. However, in some tough, dark situations, I sometimes noticed that the Yongnuo hesitates maybe a little bit more than the Sony. So I'm gonna give the point to the Sony, but like I said, both lenses are really good when it comes to autofocus performance. Then the minimum focusing distance. Both lenses have the same 15cm minimum focusing distance, but because the Sony's angle of view is slightly wider than the Yongnuo's angle of view, the subject in the frame appears slightly smaller. However, the Sony has one hidden trick. If you manually focus the Sony, you can actually get quite a bit closer compared to autofocusing. And that's why I have to give the point again to the Sony here, because of that hidden manual focus, close focus trick. When we look at the score at the moment, it looks like the Sony really trashed the Yongnuo. However, it's not that black and white or so extreme, even though the score looks like that. In real life, you can get some quite nice photos on this Yongnuo lens, and it's quite a decent budget lens after all. And to prove that, let me show you some more real-life pictures that I shot on the Yongnuo, and then I'll share my final conclusion on this comparison. So, the Sony scored 9 points and the Yongnuo scored 3 points. Looks pretty bad for the Yongnuo, right? However, the situation is not all that bad, because in most categories the differences were actually quite small and probably not deal breakers for any prospective buyers. However, the Sony scored better in the most important categories, in my opinion, the sharpness, chromatic aberrations, and distortions. And in these three categories, the Sony really destroyed the Yongnuo. And that can be a deal breaker for some of you if you're looking for the sharpest super wide angle for your Sony APS-C camera. I still think though that the Yongnuo is not a bad budget choice if you can't afford the Sony, and especially if you plan to vlog on your Sony camera, then the Yongnuo is a really nice option, because in video you can't necessarily notice chromatic aberrations and distortions so well as in photographs. So it really looks like you'll get a better lens if you pay more. But whether the better lens is also a better value for you really depends on what you mainly intend to shoot on your lens and what is your preferred platform or most used platform to share your pictures. There you have it, my comparison between these two super wide angles for Sony APS-C cameras. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you enjoyed this a lot, please do check out my e-zines, link down below. That's the best way to support my channel if you really like my content. Thank you so much, and I definitely see you soon in the next video.